Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of The Expat Edge. In today's video, we're going to learn about what it's like to live as a digital nomad in Colombia.
Welcome to The Expat Edge with Marcus and Matt, where we answer your questions about becoming an expat to help you thrive abroad.
Now, I have as a guest Joe Bautista from Bautista Planning and Analytics.com. Joe and I grew up together in the same town, and at one point I headed over to Russia, and Joe, you made your way down to South America. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and why you decided to choose South America and your experience there?
Yeah, we grew up in the same town, so it's crazy to see how much we've grown up. We pretty much separated after high school. I went into the Marine Corps. You did your thing. It wasn't until I was about in my 30s before I decided to make the leap into becoming a digital nomad. So before I was a digital nomad, I was working as a financial advisor for this one company, and it's pretty much a sales job. You eat what you kill, and I wasn't doing so very well. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. One Thanksgiving, I went to my sister's house, and we started discussing, and she was talking to me and saying, oh man, I wish I knew Spanish because it would provide so many opportunities here in Chicago. She's an interior designer, so she works with a lot of contractors that speak Spanish. And I was thinking, man, in financial planning, only about 2% of financial planners are Latino, and there's not a lot of Spanish-speaking folks out there. So I was thinking, hey, if I could speak Spanish, this could provide me a lot of opportunities. So I really wanted to become a digital nomad to, one, work on my business, and two, get an MBA, which I got from Syracuse University, and learn Spanish in the meantime. And what really helped me make that leap is I was working with a client. They were in the military. They ended up going to France for their next duty. We were just communicating over Zoom, and I was like, oh, this is easy. And I was in the mindset like, oh, we have to meet in an office. And just having that meeting over Skype just made me realize like, hey, I could do this job anywhere. That kind of just gave me the confidence to say, hey, why don't I just start my own thing? I can have more control over what I say and what I do operating within my own company. And it's not going to be that big of a risk because I can go to school and use my GI Bill. The GI Bill was giving me $1,000 a month to go to school and paying for my tuition. So I'm like, hey, I have a financial safety net, and I've been doing this for 5 years. I should be able to do this on my own instead of giving a share to the other company. I was like, let me just take everything for myself and have more control over how I operate my business as a financial planner advisor. So my dad is from Mexico, so I'm half Mexican. And that's a big reason why I want to learn Spanish is to speak to my family. After 3 years living there in Latin America, I could speak Spanish pretty well conversationally. But the reason why I went to Colombia over Mexico is in Washington, D.C., I had a lot of friends, and there was one person that was half Puerto Rican, half Colombian, and she mentioned to me that, hey, you should go to Medellín, Colombia to just check it out. I just said yes, and I feel like that's a good thing to do is just say yes to new things because you don't know what opportunities it could provide you. So that's a big reason why I went to Colombia, and I was told Colombia is one of the best places to learn Spanish. It's slow, it's professional, it's clear, and I would say that's very true in like Medellín or Bogotá or nothing on the coast. They tend to speak a little bit faster on the coast. But yeah, that's a big reason why I went to Colombia over Mexico.
Yeah, that's interesting. Your progression of, it evolved into something like, hey, I can do this online, and then you have a safety net. So I think a lot of people thinking if they want to go abroad, they have to have a huge savings account and have everything planned ahead of time. Were there some things that you just kind of figured out on the go?
Oh, I would say the biggest thing that I messed up when I first did it is I overpacked. And when you're living as a digital nomad, you have to lug that stuff around. So I was moving from apartments, Airbnbs, hotels, and it can be annoying to pack things up and then unpack them, and you're always going to lose something. So I just realized that you probably don't need a lot of the stuff that you're carrying with you, and if you do need it, you can just buy it there in that country, most likely.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes, my experience in Russia, people have asked, do you know a moving company? And I'm thinking, what do you need to move across? I mean, I understand like the expat packages where the company's paying for it anyway, but as if you're self-employed or you're a digital nomad, thinking I can buy furniture in another country, So yeah, that's interesting. And were there people who were cheering you on, or were they doubtful of your decision? Like, what was the kind of the consensus in your family and among your friends?
With friends, they were all pretty for it. I was in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a pretty transit place, so people are always coming in and leaving. So I feel like they understood that. But when it came to my family, I would say my mom, maybe my sisters were a little doubtful, worried about my safety. But I went in the Marines. I told my mom, like, hey, I'm going to the Marines in 2003. And this was during the beginning of the Iraq and Afghani war. So I was like, okay, I did this. I feel like I could do this on my own, and it should be a lot safer. And I just told myself, I went to Iraq. I can handle this.
Right. So when you were in DC, I know, Matt, he has talked about being in DC when he worked there. It was super expensive. Can you talk a little bit about when you were preparing to go, did you look at your budget, and did you get a good idea of how much you would be spending in Colombia versus DC?
So when I rented an Airbnb, it was pretty cheap the first time I went there for about 10 days. And just eating out all the time, I was like, man, I could live here a lot better than living in Washington, D.C. And one of the things I don't like is owning a car. And I like living in places like Medellín or Guadalajara, where it's very walkable for folks. So living in a place where I could walk to cafes and things like that. Yeah, but just like spending that first 10 days in Colombia just made me realize, like, yeah, this is very cheap. Like, you could get breakfast for like $1.50, and that could fill you up pretty well. And just doing that in Washington, D.C., I'm like, man, this would have cost me like $12 to $15 to get the same thing.
You initially went to Colombia first to kind of scout everything out, and then, headed back to the U.S. and then made your final decision?
Yeah, so I went there for 10 days, and then with the idea that I would start my own company, and then in the fall. So I went to Colombia in February 2019 for 10 days, and just to check it out and see how it was. And then I fell in love with the country. I love the weather there. People are really nice. I really enjoy the culture there. I'm really big into like salsa dance and bachata, reggaeton music, and that's one of the capitals is for reggaeton music. Last year I went to 7 concerts in Colombia, and that was amazing. But yeah, after that I was like, okay, here's my plan. I'm going to start my business as a financial planner on my own. So I started that, got my company up and running in July. So I was starting from scratch there. But my safety net was I was starting school in October. So I was going to go to school, work on my business in my spare time, and learn Spanish. That was my plan. I recently got divorced like 2 years before that. In 2017, I was like, okay, I have no kids. I have no significant other. This is probably one of the only times I'm going to be able to do this. And I just took the leap.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Because I think a lot of people, they'll make up excuses. I don't know how I'm going to leave this behind or change this. And it's cool to see that there are a lot of doubts, but still you can get out there. And even in your case, you went, you talked to friends, you did some research, and then you made a plan. You were on the ground and you saw, okay, this is great, actually. So yeah, I think for a lot of people, the business, like starting a business, but again, in your case, you were starting a business in the same industry that you had been working in. So you knew the business, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I had the experience, I had the confidence to find new folks. It's still a challenge when you're running a business. The hardest part is the client acquisition part. And it just requires you to know how to market yourself and ask for referrals to grow your business. I would say don't go know if you have your own business until you are established. So like in Colombia, that's like saying your company's bringing in like $1,500 to $2,000 a month for you to live off. And I would say that's pretty comfortable in Mexico as well. And then once you hit that point, then everything above that is kind of like pure profit if you're living in those countries.
Okay. Did you find any clients that you were taking on? Did you find they were asking you, like, were any of them worried about your location? Where are you? You're not stateside. You're in Colombia. You're not even in the country. Did that even come into play?
I had conversations about it, but like everyone's like, hey, this is Zoom. I trust you. And it's never been like a deal breaker that I've been living as a digital nomad. I don't know. Some people get intrigued by it. They're like, oh, I want to do that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. If anything, I guess they have more questions. Yeah, it's very cool to see how you kind of came to that decision to actually go abroad, where and why you chose that. And then also tell me a little bit about, you started that business initially, but now it's kind of evolved. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So right now I focus on tax planning and data analytics for companies. I packages as organizational management consulting. So this is what I learned in my MBA. And so this is what I'm trying to pivot towards. I don't know, people just have questions about taxes. And if you have a business, you want to kind of if you're working as a solo entrepreneur, then you kind of just want to focus on a niche and not be too broad. So people just have questions. So I just learned about taxes, look at tax returns and be like, okay, here are the recommendations to help you become tax efficient. And that's what I do.
Right. That's cool. And know where you're coming from when you say, you're moving to the US to a place that you spend less on, cost of living. You and I talked about this before, but it allows you to be either more flexible in, let's say you work with less clients, or you work with more clients and your money goes further, right? And so what's kind of with your business, how do you see it growing from managing it from abroad? Because you have a business registered in the US, but you manage everything from abroad.
Yeah, so to help me with marketing, I hired 2 marketing companies. So those could be pretty expensive. And just living in Latin America just allows me to invest more into my company to grow it faster. So the marketing companies allow me to go after higher net worth folks. And the expenses with that, like if I had to give them like 30% of my revenue for whatever I generate off of them as a new client. So here in the United States, that could be a pretty big chunk. But like if I'm living in Mexico or Colombia, that's a pretty good deal for me. Like, hey, I could take that all day, because I like to say like $1 made in the United States is like spending like $3 or $4 in Mexico/Colombia, depending on where you're at. Mexico City could be pretty expensive if you're going after luxurious things.
Right. Okay. Interesting. The last thing I want to ask you in this video is, what would you tell another person in a similar situation when you decided to go abroad? Like when you were thinking about it, let's say somebody asked you, okay, I'm thinking about going abroad. I don't know where, I don't know, how I'm going to do it. What are some tips maybe that you would say that you have learned along the way?
I would say just make sure you have a safety net. Make sure that you're not living on the margins. Test it out first. Don't commit to a year. Just commit to 2 weeks. Go down 2 weeks, check it out. If you like it, then come back. It could be one of the things to know as being as a digital nomad is it could be pretty lonely at times, because you don't have your network there. You might not know how things operate. I've been sick a couple of times, and I just thank God for Google, but I was able to figure out things to get healed. But everything's in Spanish, so you better know how to speak Spanish if you want to get things done easier.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, Joe. I know there in Colombia and Mexico, there's so many other things that you could be doing. And I'm sure this was helpful for a lot of people. If you want to reach out to Joe, you can go to bautistaplanningananalytics.com. You can also check out one of his books. He's written 2 books, The More You Know, The More You Grow, and Your Daily Cup of Joe. And I'll put his contacts in the video down below. If you have any questions for Joe, you can put them in the comments and I'll tag him when they come up. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Marcus. Thanks for having me.
This was the Expat Edge with Matt and Marcus. We hope you enjoyed the video. Visit theexpatedge.com for even more content that will help you thrive abroad. You can submit your ideas for video topics and sign up for free at theexpatedge.com. See you there.